All right, welcome back to another episode of Trustcast. And I am super excited today because I have Jodi Krangle with me. And she is a voiceover actress, but then she also does this podcast called the Audio Branding Podcast. And I'm just excited to learn all about audio and how audio affects us as people and how we can build trust with audio. So thank you so much for being here, Jodi.
Thanks so much for having me.
So first off, I just love your voice. I have to say, as a voice actor,
you.
I'm sure that you've spent a lot of time practicing. But I was listening to your video before we got on. It's a little reel of all the different voiceovers you've done, and when you jumped on, I was like, "Whoa, she sounds just like that." It sounds like a really professional voice. So I love it.
That's the point, I guess.
So I love to learn just a little bit more about that industry of voiceovers and creating voiceovers and kind of the psychology behind hiring a professional voice actor. What insight can you give us into that industry?
Well, it's a pretty close-knit and large industry, actually. It feels large from the inside, I guess. But really, I think it has a lot to do with the whole audio branding thing, which is kind of how I got interested in that topic in the first place, because I'm one small, tiny little part of that audio branding spectrum that a client is going for. So when they put out an audition and they're looking for someone to represent their company in voice, they're looking for someone who matches their brand image, who matches the way that they feel they should sound outside of their company, but also inside of their company. A lot of the people who create these kinds of things create them for internal presentations just as much as external. So a lot of the stuff that people, regular voice talent, do on a regular basis isn't the really flashy stuff. It's internal presentations, phone systems, web explainer videos, and for every company. It doesn't have to be one of the Fortune 500, like there's all sorts of this out there. And I am not really in the realm of animation, video games, and audiobooks. There are certainly lots of people who do that, and they are immensely talented, and I bow down to their talent. But I mostly stick to the advertising and corporate narration areas. And so that's really where I've had my focus. And that's kind of where I feel a lot of audio branding comes in.
Yeah, that makes sense that you want. It's like a lot of companies, they invest a lot of money into graphic design or video, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I've almost found, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think audio is almost more important than video. Like when I watch a YouTube video, if they have bad audio, I'm out of there. Like I just can't stick around.
Yeah.
But if they have okay video, but their audio sounds good, like I can forgive the video. And I don't know, maybe that's just me, maybe that's just an anecdote, but I think that good audio really does matter.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, watch a movie without sound for 2 seconds. You won't get any of the impact.
Uh-huh.
That's how film is made.
Super interesting. And I know that and this is a little different than the voice part of it, but music too is so impactful.
Oh, totally.
I know that the moments in a movie that hit you the most, oftentimes it's because of the music. The visuals help, the voice helps, but like the music, for me, that's what really moves me when I'm watching a movie.
Definitely. And it's all about emotion, really. This is all about emotion, even the sound of a human voice. In fact, that can hit you harder than a lot of other things. And as far as trust is concerned, definitely the sound of someone's voice is going to be something you find either trustworthy or smarmy or selly, or, you want someone genuine. That's actually another thing as far as voiceover is concerned, because that has changed over the years in a lot of cases. And advertising has become a lot less listen to me sell you something and more, I'm going to tell you about this thing and you can like it or not. It's really totally up to you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like if you think back to the 90s, the whole infomercial stage, like it was, buy this thing now, like get 10% off or shipping and handling in the next 24 hours. It was very, very salesman-y. Whereas nowadays it's more, here's an Instagram ad, or here's a quick little video. Let's show you what it's all about. If you're interested, great. If not, keep scrolling, you know?
Yeah. Well, the audience is skewing younger, I think. So the younger generations are their BSO meters are way up here.
Yeah.
Way up here. Like you cannot say anything to them that stinks of anything besides just saying a sentence and
Uh-huh.
being you. And really, honestly, that's how it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why a lot of voice actors get training, because this is a really artificial environment. Like I'm sitting here, whoever's listening to this after the video is without the video, I'm sitting here in a 5x4 padded room, staring at a computer screen with headphones on my head and a microphone in my face.
Uh-huh.
And I'm supposed to make a script sound like I'm actually having a conversation with someone. That's acting.
Yeah.
That's not something that most people just come by naturally.
For sure.
So
Yeah.
that's why people in the voice business get coaching. That's what that's for. I mean, for a lot of other things too. If you're in animation or video games or audiobooks, that's a completely different thing. And there's obviously training for that. But even for the advertising, you still need the training.
Yeah, and obviously we don't have the time to really dive into a full-on course of become a voice actor, but what are some of like the
Yeah.
high level most impactful things that you would learn in a voice acting school or training? Like if I wanted to become a better speaker or get my point across more clearly, what are some tricks or tactics that I can do?
Considering what you're saying is definitely a big one.
Uh-huh.
And you don't need to be, I'm just as bad as anyone with this, but you don't need filler words. That again has to do with not pausing and giving yourself time to think about things. And even like if you're reading a script, the thing about a script is for it to sound real, you actually have to sound like you're not reading. And if you're not reading, then you're considering what you're saying before you say it. And it's not all going to come out, sing-songy or one note, or it's just going to be you. The other thing that I have talked with several other people about, and a couple of them are coming on my show very, very soon. They talk about talking in your head voice or through your throat as opposed to your entire body.
Okay.
So when we talk through our head, just our head, it sounds thin and tinny and not real, not exactly all there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And when we let the sound go through our entire body, you get more of a resonance, you get more of a depth of sound. And that can help you immensely. So people who don't like the sound of their voice, that might be part of the problem.
Interesting. I'm a singer. A lot of people listening to this probably don't realize that, but I did choir all growing up, and I come from a family where we sing a lot, and so I understand like the difference.
That's how
between
I
a
got
head
started.
Voice. Oh yeah, that's awesome. I understand the difference between like a head voice and a chest voice, but when you say having it go all through your body, what are some things that people can actually do to do that? Is it posture? Is it standing up instead of sitting down? Like, what are some of those tactics?
One of the best ones is learning how to breathe. And that sounds like a really silly, basic thing, but a lot of people have learned to breathe with taking in air and their stomach going in. And really, when you are expanding the air in your body, your stomach should be going out.
Yeah.
So if you take a deep breath, your diaphragm should be inflating. So, or expanding. Your stomach should be expanding. And so when you learn how to take a deep breath with your entire body and let your stomach go out as you're taking in that breath, and then deflate when you're letting your breath out, there's a difference. Somehow, when we were kids or growing up, we learned to do it the opposite way.
Yep.
That actually, just to give credit where credit is due, I actually got that from a video I was watching, and she's going to be on my show as well. So we're going to have a more in-depth conversation about this. But her name is Cynthia Jai, and she teaches CEOs and major people of companies who have to make presentations to the board, etc., how to speak better when they're presenting these things, how to be better public speakers.
That's awesome. I'll definitely have to look her up, and I'm going to be subscribing to your podcast too, because this topic just fascinates me. So the question I have for you, and there might be a little bit of bias here on your end and my end,
Sure.
And that's okay. But I'm just curious. So let's say I'm a company, I'm wanting to create an ad or a podcast or something. What's the benefit of hiring a voice actor versus having someone in-house do it?
I get asked that a lot.
I'm sure you do.
I think it depends. Yeah. I think it depends on if that person internally has had any training. I mean, to be a natural speaker, to be able to read a script without sounding like you're reading and make it sound so that they're enthusiastic about the company and not just speaking the words on the page, imbuing them with some kind of energy and interest, that takes a professional. And I don't think internally someone's going to be able to do that for you unless they have some training of their own. And there are, of course, some people who do have that training. So I'm not going to completely, factor it out. But at the same time, you pay a professional so that you sound professional. And in general, you're probably not going to get that from Sam in accounting.
Right. And I'm going to push back just a little bit, but that's okay. And I want you to push back on me too. For the sake of conversation here. So I'm thinking from a trust building perspective, like I want someone to resonate with me, right? And with my personality. And so is that a reason to do it myself? Or is it still worthwhile to, for example, in my business and with this podcast, right? Like part of the whole purpose of this podcast is to create content and have people get to know me through this podcast, right? And so I'm just trying to figure out, would it be best for me to kind of go and get some training then and become a better speaker? Or is there still worth in making it sound better and getting a professional who knows what they're doing?
You know what? If you're talking about making your own brand, then I think it would be worth your while to get some training and do it yourself. Because it's your brand. It's you, right? You want people to know you. So that makes total sense to me. Now, a company who has multiple employees or even one guy or girl who doesn't like the sound of their own voice, I don't know how that's going to instill trust in the people hearing what they're putting out. So, it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you are your brand, then you should do your own speaking.
Okay.
If you are putting out a product or a service and you don't necessarily need to have you as the face of the brand, then I would say get a professional to do it for you, because then you sound professional. You have you've obviously put together a script that would go on a video or on hold or whatever you're creating. And it makes for a more professional brand, basically.
Yeah.
But it really depends on what that brand is. You need to know what your brand is before you do that, because I'm the first person to say I am not the right voice for every brand. Right. Certainly not. It's, I'm going to choose those as well as the people who choose me. So it's both, but you need to know what your brand is before you can decide who's going to be your spokesperson.
100%. Okay. I'm completely behind that. And I think that really it's interesting because almost every single episode of this podcast that I've recorded so far, we come back to talking about defining your brand and creating your values. And
it's really
honestly,
important.
Yeah. Like at the end of the day, you cannot create trust unless you understand what your values are and what your brand is, whether that be in your website or your copy or your audio or your video, like every piece of your brand needs to revolve around a core, right? And so that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
Yeah. And that's kind of what audio branding is all about. I mean, it's audio branding, but it is as important as your visuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people make a mistake by thinking that they can have a lovely logo and wonderful colors and fonts, and that's all they need. It's not all they need. If you want to make a really deep, trusting connection with the people who are experiencing your brand, you want to have a full sensory experience. You don't just want it to be, one dimensional.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that then. I'd love to dive a little bit into maybe the science or the psychology behind audio and why it is so impactful. Just
Sure.
on a personal level, I listen to so many podcasts. Like I'm a podcast nerd, and I feel like I know these people. And they've never met me. Like if I saw them on the street and went up to one of my podcast hosts that I listen to and said, "Hey, like I love your podcast," they'd be like, "I've never met you before, but I feel like I know them." You know,
Yeah.
how is that possible, and what's going on a psychological level?
Well, I think a lot of us, I mean, it depends on the podcast, obviously. So it depends on what they're saying. But I think a lot of people who are doing podcasts, they're doing it independently. Some of the big names are big names, and you get to know them the way that you get to know movie stars or whatever, you see them from afar and you get to know their stories, etc. But a lot of the people who are making podcasts right now are just people, just like us. And they're putting their life stories out there so that people can hear what they're all about and understand who they are and make a deeper connection with them as they do this podcast. It's almost even more intimate than being a radio DJ, because you can call into the show, sure, but you don't really have, I don't know. It just seems to me like podcasts are almost a little more personal.
Yeah, I agree. And so, why do you think that is? Are we conditioned to like listen to people and then all of a sudden have an affinity for them, or do you have any insights there?
Not necessarily. I think, though, that the human voice really connects us. And that's evolutionary. Like that's been an evolution thing. That keeps us safe. We understand who our people are by how they talk to us, right? And we can discern different nuances in the human voice in a way that you wouldn't be able to see in a visual spectrum. Like we don't have the type of visual spectrum that we do in our ears. Like our ears have an audio spectrum that's many, many times wider than our visual spectrum. So we can hear differences in emotion, in tone, in all sorts of different things that bring us closer or keep us farther apart from the people we're hearing. So I think the human voice is a very powerful connection.
Yeah. And thinking about those nuances, like, I guess that goes back to this classic problem that a lot of people have with text messages and emails, right? It's hard to understand tone and it's hard to understand emotion from words alone. It's just not quite enough information for us to understand the full story.
And I think a lot of people mistake the fact that they're not seeing the people's face as they're doing this, when I think it's almost more important for you to hear them speaking it. If that makes any sense.
No, it does. And I agree, because even a phone call has a lot more power, and phones have horrible audio quality too. Like the quality is way down, but the emotion is still so much stronger. I'd much rather jump on a call with someone to talk something out than do emails back and forth over and over again. So interesting. And it's like we're trying
a lot more from it.
It's like we're trying to compensate a little bit with things like emoji to add emotion to text, but I still don't think we're quite there.
I am putting emojis all over my emails all the time people get on my case about it, but I'm not going to stop because that text is so easy to misconstrue. You can just get the wrong thought from seeing words on a page or in an email, and one emoji, one little smiley face can get that all fine.
Totally. Well, I'm okay with emoji. I know a lot of people aren't, but I am. So send emoji my way all you want.
I actually don't use the graphical ones. I just use the text ones, like,
The colon prints, yeah.
Yeah, like I'm old school.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. Awesome. Well, so let's talk a little bit. We've kind of talked a little bit about voice. I want to talk a little bit more about music, though. And
Sure.
I know that has a huge effect in marketing. I mean, historically, I don't know when that ever started, but I think the first thing that pops in my head is jingles, right?
Oh yeah.
Because jingles,
Yeah,
I
it's
think
a
the
big
purpose
thing.
of a jingle is to get something stuck in your head and to make you think about it more easily. But like, there's so much opportunities for music. Can we dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, I can't remember who said this, and I might have to look it up or at some point, but some ad person said, if you don't have anything to say, make a jingle. So I think originally they weren't really thinking of it in the terms that we are now.
Uh,
And jingles have kind of gone out of style right now. There really aren't a whole lot of them left. But in the beginning, and I mean, it started back in the 20s, like originally they were there for entertainment. It was there to be a part of whatever radio show you were listening to.
right.
And so it was all listening. And it became so very memorable that people started using it deliberately. But it took a while for them to understand that that's what was happening.
Yeah.
And then you go from like the 90s, I think it was the 90s. It was Michael Jackson's Pepsi commercial, I
Okay.
think, when he did Takeoff of Billie Jean
Uh huh.
with the Pepsi generation. I think when that started, the ad people started doing more licensed music as opposed to jingles. They wanted like the famous singers and
Right.
performers to do spots and make them so that they, sold a product. And then jingles kind of fell out of favor, and they became just maybe like a local thing that you still hear. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that they're really all that much of a thing anymore. I think what's happening right now is that audio is becoming more of an all-around experience. So brands have brand sounds. Like, for instance, MasterCard just paid many, many millions of dollars to brand their sound, which I think is like 6 notes that are then changed depending on where geographically they're being heard. There's
Interesting.
like a second and a half little audio sound that happens when you have a transaction over something like Alexa or Google Home,
Wow.
because you don't see what's happening, right? You can't see the transaction go through.
Uh huh.
So you need to hear something in order for you to recognize that you've had a successful transaction. So it's become part of their whole identity,
Uh
and
huh.
it's usable in many different places. It's not just in, for instance, a commercial on TV. It's their radio. It's their Alexa and Google Home. It's their like every different country has a different type of musical instrument, or like a series of musical instruments that they use with those same 6 notes. You can use it for different demographics. So an older demographic might sound one way, and a younger demographic might sound another way. So there's so many different ways that you can use this, and yet it's the same sound across every touch point. So
Yeah.
there's a similarity.
And is that just to create like consistency in the brand? And oh, I hear that sound, I think of that brand. Is that the idea?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay.
Because if you hear 2 seconds of that sound, you know who you're experiencing. You don't need to see anything. And that's the
Mhm.
really cool thing about it, because a lot of things these days are going into audio only, like Google Home and Alexa and any of your smart appliances and wearables and all of that stuff. All of these things are going to only be heard. And there's another aspect to that, because if you think about this, you don't have to be paying full attention to it, right? If you're looking at an ad and you're hearing what the ad is about and you're seeing it on the television, you have to concentrate on it to get anything from it.
Right.
Whereas if you're listening to something, like we listen to podcasts, you can listen to podcasts while you're washing the dishes.
Yeah.
You can listen to podcasts while you're doing the laundry. You can do all sorts of other things while you're listening, but you can't really do that with your visuals.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And I'll try to find like either YouTube videos or audio snippets or something and put these in the show notes, so that people can listen to all the things we're referencing. But it's just making me think of like, I'm a huge Apple fanboy and technology fan. And it makes me think of like the sounds that Apple puts in, like the startup chime on a Mac, or even like the taps when you're typing a text on your iPhone. I always turn that off, but the little tap, 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 tap.
Yeah.
Or when you send a message, though.
We don't need to, right? Yeah, exactly. We don't, it's kind of funny too, because like we have put sounds into things that don't need to make that sound anymore.
Right.
Like if you're taking a photograph on your phone, you don't need to hear a click.
Yeah.
There is no click. But we've put it back there. There was, I can't remember who puts out the Leaf, but it's an electric car, and they put out a soundscape, like a CD or like a downloadable audioscape that parents could give to their kids when they're in the car, because the car no longer makes those soothing sounds that put them to sleep.
Interesting. Oh, whoa. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean, electric cars don't make the same sounds that regular cars do, right? So you need that extra little, but who knew that was what was happening with regular cars? Like, I actually didn't know that. I was interested to hear that, but apparently driving your child around in the car seems to soothe them.
Yeah.
And now that the car no longer makes that sound, you need to simulate it. You need to, have an actual like music piece that does it for you.
That's interesting. I can also imagine as we move to like an electric car future, I could also imagine maybe from a safety standpoint, because a lot of times, like if you're walking down the street, you hear a car coming, right?
You can't hear.
But if you can't hear
an electric car.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not a car engineer, but I imagine that that's a concern that people are having is, how do we make sure that people can hear this car coming so that they're not going to walk out into the street, right? So interesting.
Yeah.
Like sound is just, it's literally all around us. It's in our environment, and it makes such a big difference, but it's one of those things that at least most people, I think, don't think about consciously, because it's just always there.
No. Yeah. And it's one of those things that can heal or hurt you, because we are making a whole lot of noise. We humans are making a whole lot of noise, and our environments are getting louder all the time, and our ears can't shut off when we sleep. They're open all the time. So you have to be very conscious of the sounds that surround you, because when you're sleeping in that, it can cause stress.
Yeah.
That's why hospitals are starting to look into soothing sounds, because people can't sleep in the hospital environment. They just can't. There's too much going on, and beeps and alarms and people talking and, moving around and like all sorts of things. And there is a very big movement to make sound a much more conscious thing in a hospital healthcare environment.
And is that why like there's this big movement towards sound machines or white noise? I'm kind of a white noise skeptic. As a father, I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't want my kids to be reliant on that, right? Because a lot of parents
Mm-hmm.
their kids will go to bed with white noise, and my thought is, I want to be able to go somewhere, and if we don't have our white noise machine, like we'll still be okay, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
but is there a benefit to white noise or a detriment?
Oh, it depends, I think, on where you're using it. If you go away and you can carry that white noise with you, and in a strange environment, you can make your kids feel more safe, then I don't think that's a bad thing.
Okay.
Because the sound surrounding them in that strange environment may be something that would keep them from falling asleep. So if they have something they're familiar with, that might make it easier. At the same time, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I
Yeah.
know when I was a kid, my parents gave me the radio, and I had the radio on before I went to bed, and I couldn't sleep without it for a long, long time.
Uh-huh. So interesting. Well, I think that
Mm-hmm.
sound is definitely something I want to learn more about. And to do that, I'm going to be listening to your podcast for sure. So I definitely
I talk
recommend.
about a lot of things. Yeah.
I definitely recommend to our listeners. Obviously, you're listening to this on a podcast app. So go ahead and search right now for the Audio Branding Show. Is that what it is?
Audio branding podcast.
Audio
Yeah.
Branding Podcast. Yeah, go ahead and search for that. I
Mm-hmm.
think that it's definitely something worth learning more about as marketers and as branders. Is there any
I'm
other
totally learning more all the time.
Yeah, I think we all are, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this
Yeah.
this industry is an industry of learning. Things are
Mm-hmm.
changing so quickly. Like just the other day I was thinking, my goodness, a marketer that an older marketer, someone who's maybe in their 50s or 60s at this point, like their entire industry has changed so much in the last 10,
Yeah.
15 years. For me, it's like, oh yeah, it's all this technology because I'm just getting started. But I just imagine how
Mm-hmm.
quickly this landscape is changing for people. So it's always important to keep learning for sure.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well, is there anything that we haven't talked about, Jodi, so far related to audio or marketing that you think we should bring up?
Well, there is one thing that I talked about with Steve Keller on my podcast, and I was mentioning before we got on the recording. He's the sonic strategy director at Pandora, and he's done a bunch of different stuff and is a musician, a psychologist, and an ad guy. So really, really cool conversation we had. One of the things he mentioned was an advertising campaign that they had done for Propel, the drink,
Mhm.
it's like an electrolyte drink, where they had put a DJ station together where people could listen in their ears and in headphones and taste the drink, and they could dial in whether they wanted more salt or more sweet by what they were hearing.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Yeah. So our senses all work together. And we can influence what we taste by what we hear.
That's super interesting. So wait, let me make sure I understand what
It
you're
is.
saying. So basically,
Yeah.
they would play a sound in their ear, or, I don't know, music or
Mhm.
whatever it was, and that would make them want more salt in their drink.
Not want. It would, like, they're tasting it,
Uh-huh.
and they could decide whether they wanted it saltier or sweeter.
Oh, so it would affect the perception of the taste.
Yes.
Oh my
exactly.
goodness, that's insane.
Yeah. How cool is that, though? I mean, we're weird creatures.
Yeah, I mean, now that
But I
you
love
say
it.
it makes sense because I know like that smell affects taste, right? Like there's that
Yeah,
classic thing
totally.
where if you plug your nose and eat something, then you can't like differentiate different tastes. So
Mhm.
so interesting. So all of our senses, all five senses, are really interacting with each other and affecting each other.
They are. Some of them are more tied than others. It depends on where they're interacting in the brain. I believe the sense of smell and the sense of hearing are our most powerful ones. So you'll experience things like, for instance, you'll hear the creak on a floor in a kitchen, and all of a sudden you'll remember baking cookies with your grandmother when you were 6, because
Yeah.
that was the same sound, right? And you're not just remembering it, you're there. It's like time travel.
Mhm.
You're actually experiencing it. And, smell will do that to us too. But things like the music that an establishment plays in a restaurant can have a very big impact on how people experience and taste the food that they're eating.
Yeah.
So if, like, I know that Steve was experimenting with a friend of his on sustainable food and things like that. I think he had mentioned something like that, and they were trying to make a certain food crunchier when people experienced it, just to make it more like mouth satisfying, right? But it was because of the music that they were listening to while they were dining, right? I mean, dining's not happening all that much anymore right now,
Right.
but at the same time, when that does resume, the music that you play in a restaurant can have a big impact on how people experience the taste.
Yeah. And I'm almost just thinking right now, thinking about all these different senses, taste, sight, smell, hearing, touch. Like, I think that would be an interesting exercise for a brand to go through. Like, let's list all
Oh,
our
totally.
senses and to say, okay, what do people smell when they walk into our establishment? What do people hear?
Yeah.
What music is playing when they see our ads or come into our shop or whatever it is?
Yep.
Or if it's a physical product that we're shipping to them, how does the product feel? How does it sound when you're taking the wrapping paper off or the packaging off? Like all of these
Yes.
things that I just think it'd be a
Yes.
fun exercise for a brand to sit down and list them out and say, okay, what's good about these things? What's bad about these things? And what can we improve to make our experience better?
Yeah, definitely. Retail establishments, especially, because when people go into your store, it should be an experience. And even the stores where the music is like loud and designed for younger people. Yes, I understand that. But even younger people are going to walk out more quickly if you're assaulting their ears. If it's too loud, they're still going to not spend more time in there than they absolutely have to, And I mean, again, it depends on the person, but generally, when you're actually measuring these things, you will find that people will only stay around that sort of environment for so long.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how old they are. You want to make a pleasant environment for the people that you are trying to get to experience your brand. But at the same time, you want to make an authentic connection with them. And sound is a really good way to do that.
I love it. Wow. Okay. You've given me a lot to think about, Jodi. I appreciate that. I know that you have a free PDF that you're offering. Where can we find that? What are we going to learn from that? And then also where else, if people want to connect with you or ask you a question, where can they find you?
Sure. The audio branding strategy document that I have is 5 tips to be more intentional with your audio branding strategy. So if you're really looking for steps that you can take to give yourself some idea of what your audio branding could be and how to work that out, I've put together a PDF that is at voiceoversandvocals.com/audio-branding-strategy. And if people want to reach out to me for either voiceovers or advice or whatever they want to talk about, I'm at voiceoversandvocals.com. And if they want to experience the podcast, that is at audiobrandingpodcast.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And like I said, I've learned a lot. So I'm looking forward to editing and listening to this show again. Thank you for listening to Trustcast. This podcast has been a production of JMH Media. I'm Jacob Harmon, and I've been your host. The Trustcast podcast team consists of Josh Harmon and Steve Hill. I really couldn't do this without them. Music licensing comes thanks to Epidemic Sound. And if you've liked what you've heard, we invite you to subscribe to Trustcast in your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. It really does help. Join us next time as we continue to break through the noise by building real human connections and trust in business. See you then.